A complete curriculum for Weird Girl Winter. This will cover what Weird Girl exactly is, the core philosophical books that help us understand that, book recommendations divided by type. So the weird of Weird Girl is fantasy, our own fantasy. And fantasy is weird, whether that's, quote, normal fantasy or a fantasy that is surreal. Either way, we're touching the fabric of reality itself and getting to our warpedness. So typical fiction will engage fantasy from an outside distance, put a buffer there to help, and that buffer helps the fantasy be effective. But what Weird Girl specifically does is help us fall into the fantasy completely, into its weirdness, make it our own, and through that, we change. That's effectively what Weird Girl is. It's about falling into fantasy and then getting to the change that happens on the other side of that. So it's radical. It's inherently radical. If Weird Girl is showing you someone who is weird and stuff happens to them, the end from, let's say, a storyteller perspective where there's some buffer there, that's not weird anymore. We have to occupy the space of the weirdness ourselves. So think, in Psycho, we fall into Norman Bates' position. In Frankenstein, we become the monster. So we're getting to our own inherent weirdness, our own askewness, and seeing how that warps the world around us. Now, the female stance is privileged because it is most open to following its own fantasy through to its radical conclusion, to being open to the undone state of things that allows for fantasy to transport us. The male stance will shirk back with its posturing by saying, well, this is what we have to be to uphold the world, basically. So it's not strictly speaking feminine, but it is essentially feminine. So there are really two works that one needs to read to truly get what's at work here, to be able to identify what's Weird Girl and what's not. Todd McGowan's Impossible David Lynch gets to how fantasy is at work in Lynch's films and how we fall into it, starting with Eraserhead. Eraserhead is a foundational Weird Girl work of fiction despite it being a male character. So the framing is really important here. Weird Girl fiction is the embrace of alienation, our own alienation. So when we're coming into contact with an alienating thing, it's not an out there problem to deal with, to get some buffer from, to get on the other side of. This is all about matter of getting to our own position and the alienation inherent to that, how alienation is the gap that we connect with one another through, rather than through belonging. This is a very simple, clean work. It doesn't give you all of the philosophy involved, but it gives you the sense of, what the importance of alienation is. Weird Girl fiction is inherently dialectical. You don't have to read Hegel's Phenomenology, but you do have to get to this sense that we are getting to our own involvement. And you do that by seeing your own position through. You make this detour through error, through the weirdness, and you get to your own skin, your own full position, and it's only from there that you change. That's what opens up the possibility of change. Todd also very kindly blurbed for Where We've Made It Dark, so I'm very touched that he did that. My work engages alienation through the zombie fantasy as this inherent alienating thing. So the fantasy we're seeing through in Where We've Made It Dark is the zombie fantasy, but it takes us to our own alienation. So we're realizing our innermost fantasy through the zombie. It's completely undoing when we do that, and we're getting to radical change. I think there are three core works to recommend for Weird Girl. The first is Bunny, because Bunny is the most fun. It's easiest to fall into, especially if you're not that comfortable with weirdness, because it's just fun to talk about, the bunny talk and fall into that ourselves. It's not the most radical work. It's not the most impressive with what it does at all, but it is, properly speaking, Weird Girl, and it's just a lot of fun. The best Weird Girl book, I think very clearly, is You Too Can Have a Body Like Mine. It is Kafkaesque, David Lynchian. It is a literary powerhouse. It like line by line, it's really riveting. It's psychoanalytically engaged. It is engaging capitalism and consumerism and beauty. It's weirder by far than everything else here. So this is really a wonderful work. The other side is a touch of Jen, because you have to get to what the male position is too. We can't just treat Weird Girl as a girl-only thing and keep men in this position of being counter to it or the sexist position that we're struggling against. There is a weird side to masculinity too, but it doesn't get there far enough. But where does it get us? So here we have the weird couple, and they're fixated on a third party, their friend, and how they take a separate path, the male and the female. And it's also written in interesting stages. It's surprising. So A Touch of Jen is an essential work as well. Now, there is the other side, the less fun side of Weird Girl, is desire, the need to connect to the world and the inability to do so. That's the other side of fantasy. Fantasy isn't something that we can just stay at this hyper real side of things. We are trying to connect to our own fantasy, and it's difficult. That's we're desiring subjects, so you need to get to the works that explore desire radically to really have a full sense of Weird Girl. And the two works for that are My Year of Rest and Relaxation and The Guest. The Guest is the simpler of the two, but both get us to a very, radically desiring minimal point. And they fight our own enjoyment as such. You can also throw in I Too Have Never Known Men, but that isn't following fantasy through. That's getting to the precluding of fantasy by cutting back everything possible. Here we are getting to fantasy as well, but it's through this minimal state. The Guest is a person just trying to exist in reality, and Year of Rest and Relaxation is a person who has everything but can't connect to it emotionally, psychically. But we're getting to breaking points. How do we break through that? So you have to get to you have to get to the desire side of things too. There is also the horror. Horror is tricky because horror can make us shirk back, in particular, to a stand-in from change, something that keeps us from seeing our fantasy all the way through. But we don't do that with Eyes Are the Best Part. This is a really nicely weird work that goes beyond just struggling against racism and sexism. It gets us to our own engagement with the eyes itself. So I think this is a really wonderful work. I'm currently reading The Lamb, and I don't know where it leads, but it is written beautifully. So I'll throw that one in there too. So Weird Girl is following our fantasies through to its radical conclusion, to a point where we change. And if we stop short of that change, then we've failed in the concept. So that can be, through a violent, shirking back and keeping who we are static. That can be the falling into a sense of wholeness with the world, which washes away our own inherent weirdness. We can relax now. These are ways of failing in the concept of not actually following through. So it's really tricky and delicate work. That's why I think it's important to have some understanding of what we're looking for as we go through it. But there's a lot out there, and I'm going to be doing more Weird Girl reading for Weird Girl Winter, so follow for more recs. And if you have a favorite that you think is absolutely core to a Weird Girl curriculum, please let me know in the comments.